This week in Jamaica Now.
During the period where persons were getting gun licenses under questionable circumstances, everybody made money from it.
Controversy at the Firearm Licensing Authority. The CEO says more than 200 gun permits were issued to ex-convicts and people with adverse traces. A former deputy chairman is in the line of fire.
I'm a straight shooter, and I speak my mind openly and forthrightly.
The opposition says the FLA CEO must go. Then, Dennis Meadows reaps Twitter wrath after a disparaging comment about Crystal Tomlinson. Secret recordings of alleged gangsters played in court. We'll have the latest. And no cash, no problem. Central Bank signs off on new logo for digital currency, but Jamaicans are not liking it. I'm Damian Mitchell, and this is Jamaica Now. Controversy is raging at the Firearm Licensing Authority, the FLA, following the revelation by Chief Executive Officer Shane Dalling that from 2014 to 2017, more than 200 convicts or people with adverse traces were granted gun permits. These include a known Don and an extradited drug convict who were each granted 4 gun permits. Mr. Dalling says entertainer Jacure was also granted a gun permit despite his conviction for rape and illegal possession of a firearm. According to Mr. Dalling, the applicants had been previously denied gun permits and there was no new documentation or appeal on their files.
During the period where persons were getting gun licenses under questionable circumstances, everybody made money from it. So the ranges made money because each time you attend on a range for training, you have to pay. The dealers made money because they were selling far more firearms and ammunition because of the sheer number of persons who were getting gun licenses. In fact, during the period 1 year, dealers sold $1.2 billion worth of firearms.
And former Deputy Chairman of the FLA, Dennis Meadows, has taken issue with Mr. Dalling's assertions, defending his stewardship and that of his former board colleagues.
Mr. Dalling's defamatory pronouncements this morning not only seek to impugn my reputation and character, but also that of my former board colleagues, and is the action, in my view, of an obvious, desperate man who sees the walls closing in on him.
Meanwhile, Mr. Dalling has conceded that the level of corruption at the FLA is significant, saying he does not think he can fix the problem. And the opposition has called for Mr. Dalling to be removed from the FLA as its boss for poor performance. The spokesman on national security, Peter Bunting, says the FLA needs sober and competent leadership to restore the integrity of the entity.
It is evident that the FLA has become a cesspool of corruption over the last 6 years. Further evidence of poor governance and non-performance is the fact that the controversy-riddled entity has not even submitted an annual report to Cabinet since 2016-2017 fiscal year.
Mr. Bunting also wants the Integrity Commission to complete the investigation into corruption in the issuance of firearm licenses by the FLA. The probe was launched by the Office of the Contractor General in 2017. Meanwhile, Mr. Meadows on Friday provoked outrage on Twitter for a disparaging comment made towards former People's National Party Youth Organization President Crystal Tomlinson. Meadows was responding to a post by Tomlinson, who first tweeted that he was struggling to sound honest in a nationwide radio interview. Hours later, Meadows fired back, like you struggled to remain baby mother 13, but failed miserably. His comment evoked a swift response from Crystal Tomlinson. She replied, quote, "Dennis, my vagina and reproductive choices aren't your business. The FLA was your business. Being diligent, fair, and accountable in executing your duties was your business. If you had half of the passion for your work as you do my body, you wouldn't be struggling to address these allegations." Mr. Meadows has since apologized and deleted his tweet. In other news now, the Supreme Court has started to hear secret recordings of the alleged gangsters in the Klansman One Don gang trial. 32 members of the One Don gang, a breakaway faction of the Klansman gang, are on trial on a 25-count indictment. For more on this story, we are now joined by court reporter Tanisha Mundell. Tanisha, what would you say has been the most impactful revelation from the recordings so far?
Well, so far there have been several startling assertions from the gang members. One of them being that they had police officers who would feed them with information. Stephanie Christie, the lone female defendant in the case, had said in her conversation that it was a police officer who had told her who was the witness in the case against Tesha Miller, the reputed leader for the Klansman gang. The court also heard during the conversation with the witness that Blackman had indicated that he would be getting rid of traitorous gang members who were not with him, and this was while he was in custody.
And based on what you have heard so far, is there any other defendant implicated?
So far, we've only heard conversation with the witnesses and the alleged leader, the second-in-command city post, and the female defendant. So there are others to come. The other gang members were just mentioned in passing. According to Christie, she said she was almost second-in-command in the gang. The alleged second-in-command city post was heard saying that Christie doesn't have any position in the gang over him. And also, Blackman was heard saying that the only way that they could convict him was if they had a witness in the gang who knew things. So, in my mind, they are actually confirming that they were operating this criminal entity.
And earlier this week, there was an abrupt adjournment of the hearing. What was behind that?
The prosecution witness made a very shocking request. During the playing of the recording, he wasn't hearing properly, and so he indicated that he wanted to leave his remote location and to come inside the courthouse, the courtroom where the defendants were. So everyone was shocked by that request. But the judge, I suppose, ruled against his request.
And finally, then, what can we expect going into the next week?
Next week, more recordings will be played. So far, we have not heard anything about the gang members plotting any murder or talking about any murder that we have heard in the trial. So maybe that is to come. I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, court reporter Tanisha Mundell. Several cases that were scheduled for the court at Brownstown in St. Anne have been shifted to offices at the Addison Park Sports Complex following Sunday night's fire at the courthouse. Chief Justice Brian Sykes visited the site the morning after. He said numerous files were lost in the fire.
But this will mean that we'll have to be rebuilding the files, certainly from the police and also in respect of the civil matters that are before the court. We'll be reaching out to the attorneys to resubmit some of the documents that they may have filed in court. In terms of the criminal matters, largely the files coming in from the police and from the way in which they organize themselves now, where a lot of the statements, if not all the statements, are recorded on a computer. We should have those statements available, and there might be third-party documents such as forensic certificates, such as medical certificates, which would have to retrieve from third parties to reconstruct those files so that they can proceed to final disposition.
The Chief Justice is to have further dialogue with the Justice Minister regarding the possibility of constructing a new courthouse. The Clarendon police are investigating the death of a 16-year-old boy, Javid Moody, who is believed to have shot himself with a gun of a policeman who is also his brother. After work on Saturday evening, the cop reportedly arrived home in Top Hall's Hall, undressed himself and headed to the bathroom. But before doing so, the policeman reportedly placed his gun on his clothes in the bedroom. While he was in the bathroom, Moody reportedly picked up the weapon and went into his room. An explosion was heard and Moody was later found suffering from a gunshot wound to his head. He was pronounced dead at a hospital. Inflation hit a new high in January at 9.7% as food prices continue to climb. The Bank of Jamaica's Monetary Policy Committee has now decided to raise interest rates again for a fourth time. The annual inflation rate previously climbed as high as 8.5% in the latter part of last year, but fell back to 7.3% as at December. Inflation aside now, the central bank was under the microscope this week as social media users weighed in on the logo selected from several entries for the new central bank digital currency. The logo, the name of the currency, Jamdex, and the tagline, "No cash, no problem," were released on Thursday. Well, what are your thoughts? And that's it for this edition of Jamaica Now, your weekly review of the big news stories. Send us your comments at onlinefeedback@gleanerjm.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Jamaica Gleaner and on Facebook at Gleaner Jamaica. Like this video on our YouTube page. Subscribe today and turn on your notifications. I'm Damian Mitchell, and before we go, how a blind DJ is making sweet music with banger phones.
Say for instance, the party early and people not come in. Me have a couple mix on my phone and my virgin make. Just go and play them there. Occupy the time. When party time now, we use them and juggle like a laptop. You understand? Yeah, me use them and just juggle like a laptop. Then me have my laptop.
Suppose I ask you now to get me a Berries file.
Yes, I can get you a berries.
Go ahead.
You want a berries file? Alright. This is a berries.
Say you're playing at a session now or a party. Just give us an example of how you would
Alright.
play.
Can I have a mic?
And do people ask a request and so on, and you're able to find the
No.
request?
Yeah, if people ask for a request, I will find a request once I have it. You know they up on the ground, don't it? I big up Sean Knight party when thing low, right? You know what DJ squeeze are, right? You know what early? I go and box some tune from early, you understand? So that beat time. And I mean time now. You know we all want me to right then?